New York State's power supply ran critically low during last year's Christmas blizzard. A new report raising eyebrows. 7 News reporter Zach Grady live in studio to explain and also tell us what local lawmakers are saying. Zach?
Jeff, natural gas is used to make electricity, and during last year's Christmas blizzard, the state ran low on that natural gas supply, threatening blackouts at perhaps the coldest time of year. Local lawmakers, though, believe here in the North Country, the worry should not be as much as for those downstate.
The blackouts aren't likely to happen in northern New York.
State Senator Mark Walzig is referring to blackouts that almost occurred last year during a historic Christmas-time snowstorm. In a recent report, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and the North American Electric Reliability Corporation says the state narrowly dodged a Christmas-time crisis.
I think this report points out the fact that, some of this renewable generation is not reliable, and so therefore we can't depend upon it to meet our baseload energy needs.
A dependence, however, that the North Country does not need to be as concerned about as residents in heavier populated areas of the state, like New York City.
We have a lot of hydro facilities. We've got some solar, we've got some wind, we've got nuclear power facilities just to the south of us.
The vice president of external affairs for New York's Independent System Operation agrees, saying in a statement to 7 News, "We were able to maintain electric service in New York State in large part because many of our generating units are able to switch fuels during times of high demand and stress on the gas system." The state's Department of Public Service says the stresses on the grid are not coming from inside New York, but from across state lines, saying in a statement, "This emergency was caused by an out-of-state shortage, and reliability on interstate pipelines and producers do not fall under New York's jurisdiction." The governor's office seconds those statements from the Department of Public Service about the out-of-state supply issues, saying that the governor's office is calling for federal action to establish stricter reliability standards on both producers and pipelines. Jeff?
Zach Grady live tonight. Thank you.